10 years ago, a friend of ours from Hong Kong decided that he wanted to take his high-end audio system with him on the go and started his own in-ear monitor company to do just that. Now, while he hasn't continued his company, down the track many other companies have succeeded in producing in-ear models using the latest 3D printing and driver technology to produce amazing results, literally like a pair of high-end speakers in your ears. While some of them cost many thousands of dollars, some of the technology has trickled down into less expensive models, and now you can get some fantastic inexpensive in-ear monitors as well as headphones. I made my way to CanJam Singapore as I did last year, and these are my impressions of some of those high-end in-ear monitors and headphones. It's worth noting for my preferences that I prefer in-ear monitors that are fairly neutral with a touch of warmth that work with all genres of music. I do find that a lot of in-ear monitors tend to be slightly too bright for my preferences, as well as having maybe a slightly too aggressive mid-range, which I'm not entirely sure if that's the in-ear monitors or just my ears. But to that end, I have listed the music I used in my evaluation through Chord's Hugo 2 in the description of this video. This report was made possible by Schiit Audio, Final Audio, and Bloom Audio, so I'd like to thank them for sponsoring this report and my channel respectively. As well, let me know after watching which of these products you'd like to see me review, or which of those you think I should check out at the next CanJam. Noble Audio continues to push the boundaries of what's capable with high quality sound from a pair of active noise cancelling headphones with their multi-driver Apollo Pro. Unlike the original Apollo, they've worked on improving the bass response when the noise cancelling is activated. To this end, they've added silicone to the pads for a better seal, and that made a distinct improvement when the noise cancelling was switched on. It still has a V-shaped tuning, which has still a good mid-range, which should appeal both to regular consumers as well as audiophiles. For example, Joe Strummer's Mondo Bongo was good with good bass punch and not having that drop when the noise cancelling was switched on. The Black Rebel Motorcycle Club's Restless Sinner was crisp, with a bit of harshness. The Choir of Young Believers' Hollow Talk was surprisingly clear with sharp, if bright vocals, very likely from using my iPhone, and a touch of the edginess did go away though with the ANC switched off. QDC, which is a long-established brand of IEMs, had their Crave on display, and at $2,900 that's certainly up there in the high end, although not the super high end as some of the models I've tried. To that end, I continued with Choir of Young Believers, for which Hollow Talk was airy and open, although some of the notes had maybe slightly short decay. The hall echo was great, suggesting very good resolution as to be expected. Dead Can Dance's Song of the Nile with its deep bass was spacious with excellent percussion timbre, and the wind instrument sounded real, with the vocal decay had nuance, which was fantastic, cementing these IEMs as a definite high-end model. The piano, of course, most importantly, was convincing on Kunihiko Sugano's Summertime, and the Spiral Dot Pro tips which I used reigned in the treble and a touch of the aggressiveness which I found from them, and which is not surprising given I tend to prefer a slightly more neutral tuning to what most Chinese models tend to have. Going to the Tango Project's Chunga's Revenge was punchy, but the treble was a tiny bit imperfect. Still, very coherent and very much up there at the kind of price they're asking for. Hi-Fi Man had their top-of-the-line Shangri-La electrostatic headphone system on the floor, although while it wasn't the most ideal place to listen, I did have another listen to this amazing system, which I had previously auditioned in their Tokyo office with a Colin Davis at the source and binaural music, where it sounded like the music was being played in the room with you. However, the highlight of the show was the new Wi-Fi models. The HE1000 Wi-Fi and ARIA Wi-Fi allow you to take Hi-Fi Man sound on the go without having to plug the headphones into a dedicated DAC amp, as they're built into the headphones themselves. Alongside that, they have a streamer built in, allowing lossless transmission over Wi-Fi from software such as Cobuzz, Tidal and Roon. Listening with these models, I've found that they are equivalent to plugging a pair of HE1000 or ARIAs into a portable R2R DAC amp from Hi-Fi Man, with the same benefits and limitations. They have a more gentle presentation, as Hi-Fi Man's R2R architecture is wonderful to listen with, such as I experienced with the Serenade. However, at moderate listening levels it is quite pleasant, but at higher volumes you find the amplification's limits, just like you would from a portable device. They also can be used via USB directly if latency is a problem, and they as well have a Bluetooth input. Prior to the main CanJam show, I had the opportunity to try Chord's new $35,000 Quartet Scalar with the Chord Hugo 2, which I brought with me to the show, and then later on the show floor with the Chord Dave. For that purpose, I had a pair of Dan Clark Audio Stealth headphones and also the Chimera in-ear monitors from Campfire Audio, which I had borrowed to evaluate and for which I shopped a separate video about. Now, to describe the effect of Chord's Scalar, it's more in reverse of normal. We're used to buying high-end audio gear to enhance our experience of music, but in the case of the Scalar, it was so real when listening to music that afterwards, just using the Hugo 2 by itself was a massive letdown, feeling like something was missing. Also, immediately after having used Chord's Quartet Scalar, I had another manufacturer's product in for evaluation, and I just could not enjoy listening with it. Such was the difference that the Chord Scalar made to my appreciation for music. What was also remarkable was that Rob had a demonstration of the difference between a tape recorded digitally using the high-end Pro Audio interface and the ADC built into the Chord Quartet Scalar. Even on his phone speaker, it was readily apparent that the difference between the Pro Audio recording, which initially when you first listened to it sounded fine, but then the Quartet Scalar produced a smoother and more listenable version of that recording. Then, switching again back to the Pro Audio version through the speaker of his phone, it sounded, in a way, distorted with the pitch and flow completely off, and that was a really shocking revelation how much difference the technology in the Chord Scalar can make. And I think it's going to be a real shock to the Pro Audio world once Rob finishes his Pro Audio ADC. Schiit Audio surprised everyone by turning up to CanJam Singapore with a new portable DAC amp, the Vestri. More or less the mesh DAC card, which is an add-on for their amplifiers fitted into a portable device. The Vestri takes their unique USB and digital audio filter implementation and puts it into a portable unit. While not as powerful or as fully featured as many of the portable DAC amps out there, the sound quality from the Vestri does have its own unique take, which I think is superior in many ways to that of regular DAC amps. I have done a full review on the Vestri, which you may well already be aware of. Do check it out for everything I have to say about that. Unmissable on DUNU's table was the Concept V, or Concept 5 if you consider it a Roman numeral, a premium DAC amp combo that uses a discrete R2R DAC, 6922 tubes for the output, and has a dedicated linear power supply. The most striking thing about this was the knobs and switches on it, which are decidedly retro, as well as the unusual layout. I had planned to take the Dan Clark Audio Stealth headphones down to have a listen with this, but unfortunately didn't get around to it. But that's something I look forward to doing at a future CanJam, as this could be a very interesting unit, not just for the design, but for the sound quality as well. Hercules Audio was there with the new Moses Legend in-ear monitors, a more refined version of their highly regarded Moses IEMs. They have a big soundstage with the drums on the direct-to-DSD Carmen Gomez Sings the Blues album, having extended decay suggesting the highest levels of detail and resolution. Vocals, though, are warm while maintaining a sparkle and sense of space, and the presentation overall pulls off the trick of being both warm yet very spacious. Kunihiko Sugano's Summertime reveals some fine detail and timbre imperfections in the treble at the level of maybe extreme nitpicking, and given they are the very top of the line IEMs available, that is certainly something worth considering, but that is also possibly due to what may be an attempt to keep the tuning somewhat neutral. Jeff Roy's Ricuardo de Ti was entertainingly punchy while maintaining the soundstage and was immensely enjoyable, suggesting these IEMs are definitely up there with some of the best available in the hobby. Visioneers had the final version of their Phonix IEMs, which I had tried last year in Tokyo. I'd also tried the Zens, which I really liked and were one of my best of shows, but I wanted to listen to them again as I hadn't had a chance to do so out of the Hugo 2. I find the Zen to be a good, detailed, neutral reference, and after listening with Campfire Audio's Chimera, piano and cymbal note decay as well as trumpet was still good, but a step behind in resolution, but of course they are considerably cheaper than the Chimera. There is still a sense of naturalness to the way Yoko Mabuchi was presented that makes me want to keep listening through to the end, and I still like them a lot as IEMs. But the Phonix, and unlike my last audition, the level of detail from them has improved, piano dynamics standing out more than with the Zen, and this using spin-fit ear tips. Note decay seems longer than before, however the tuning strays away from neutral. Switching to Kunihiko Sugano's Summertime, like before, the Phonix prioritizes dynamics more, but this time at the expense of a neutral tuning. The mid-range is uneven, a touch too prominent somewhere around 1 kHz, and the bass is not too overdone however, and is a touch reserved after having listened with the Hercules Audio IEMs in comparison. Forte Ears had a preliminary version of their Violetta IEMs, not the final tuning, but all the same, the Carmen Gomez track felt like it was slowed down, a sign that they were reproducing actual detail and not just sounding bright. The tuning is warm enough, bringing body to the music, and while it doesn't have the big sound stage that you get with something like Hercules Audio or some other IEMs, there is a good amount of space. It was quite good with Dead Can Dance, but maybe not quite up to what, say, the Chimera can do with the treble. It's a bit aggressive with Kunihiko Sugano's Summertime and doesn't have quite the magic for piano yet. Likewise, the Yoko Mabuchi track is still quite good, but again, not quite at the magic level. However, the tuning was very even, which is its main strength, so I hope that they can get the tuning just right for reproduction of instruments. On the second day, I headed up to the second floor to check out the final DX10000 headphones with their diamond-coated drivers. The first thing I noticed with them hooked up to the Burson amp and using the Hugo 2 as the source was that the treble isn't sparkly and that it's tuned more like a studio monitor, but then there's the effortless detail coming from the music. Kunihiko Sugano's Summertime comes through with what I felt was too much mid-range aggression, though it's hard to tell whether it's the track or not, or it's just the headphones revealing the dynamics of this very well recorded piano piece. I then switched directly to the Hugo 2 at this point and got much the same result, so that eliminated the amplifier from the cause. Yoko Mabuchi's live album was overemphasized, I felt, with some strange harshness and resonance in the mid-range. To my ears, this headphone needs some work, although I gather that there's a particular reason for the unusual tuning, and that would require a whole separate video to explain. Next up, I went back to the IEMs with the Symphonium Zenith, their new flagship in-ear monitor using entirely balanced armature drivers. From this IEM, Yoko Mabuchi gets a very sparkly piano delivery, and that makes it sound quite intense out of the Hugo 2. Almost all the note decay harmonics were apparent, putting it up close to the really high end. Cymbals sounded quite real, and the low bass rumbles without interfering. They were a bit smoother through the EVO Aria amp. Jeffroy was punchy, but a touch too bright for my tastes, and the mid-bass was a touch thick as well, if quite good. I then tried the SpinFit Pro tips on them, which cleaned up the treble a bit, but not perfectly. Switching to the upgrade Vortex cable improves things quite dramatically, calming down the treble while leaving everything intact. I will have a review of these in-ear monitors out soon. A whole room upstairs was dedicated to RAAL, Allnick and Audma with a variety of high-end gear. I wanted to try the Imanis again, in this case out of the Allnick HPA 15000 and their own music server. They have a very absolute sound even with the CD quality version of Yoko Mabuchi, for which I had to use their own server to access. So for something different I switched to Queens of the Stone Age, and the dynamics were hilariously great, as the RAAL headphones have always delivered. Low bass though, as usual, was somewhat missing. Now apart from that low bass rumble, everything else was just purely fantastic, and I really had to drag myself away from these headphones because I just wanted to listen on and on and on. But importantly, they had the new Magna EVO 1 headphones. In this case, they were plugged into an Audma HPA 1. Summertime from Kunihiko Sugano just disappeared. I wanted to listen rather than evaluate. It wasn't like listening to the music came through with absolute magnificence. The piano was delicate, nuanced and smooth on quieter notes, then dramatic when things got louder, something that can be very hard to achieve well with headphones. Another track on the Accuphase SACDs is Symphony No. 9 in E minor from the New World, played by the London Symphony Orchestra and conducted by Colin Davis. This was simply great without any obvious fault. There's nothing more I can say about it. However, the thing about the Magna EVO one is that the bass seemed better from these than it does the regular Imanis. However, it does sacrifice a bit of the dynamics the Imanis have in exchange for that better bass. Switching again to something different, Gotan Project was punchy. Now some people might have issues with the mid-range balance, which is somewhat forward, but otherwise I cannot find any serious flaws. I look forward to checking out these headphones on a variety of other amps at CanJam SoCal. Another pair of headphones I wanted to try out again was the electrostatic Hongshu Audio EHA1 version 4. In this case they had it running from a TT2 and their own included amp. That's pretty decent with the Gotan project. With such a small amp, the bass is not as punchy as it might be, but also I felt that the 1 kHz range was, or thereabouts, was a bit too forward for taste. Speed, however, is great, and the amp runs out of steam fast at louder volumes, so I switched to a Blue Hawaii that they had on hand from my Hugo 2, and the result was distinctly better. One little minor thing that the headband adjuster kept slipping, so I hope that fixed that in the future. Jeffroy was quite good with it, but with the bass somewhat reserved if quite detailed. While upstairs I encountered DMS, who was with Critical searching for his ideal pair of in-ear monitors, for which he has his own video. I also checked out the Viking Droupnir. Now Viking is a company that is primarily known for its cables, especially the ones on the Modhouse tungsten. So I was very interested to try these headphones as they are both 3D printed and use multiple drivers, which is pretty rare in headphones in general. They are very insensitive headphones requiring a lot of gain. And I felt Yoko Mabuchi is reasonably nuanced from these headphones, but there is some glare in the mid-range, something I might put down to some part or another of the design, if not reflections, then maybe the drivers. But still, they have very nice space and soundstage for the setup. The bass mode requires considerable gain boost, and Jeffroy was both punchy and spacious in that mode, if the frame was vibrating with all that bass. And the bass detail was actually quite impressive in less busy passages. Handmade in Japan, Kobo had their new flagship Model 491 on display. Compared to the previous Model 465, the Model 491 features a 4.4mm balanced Pentacon output, as well as LED 3 solder throughout. The Model 491 sells for $20,000 US, and that's before shipping and tax, and is only built as made to order. They also had the Model 433 on display, which was considerably cheaper at $27.50 US. Kobo's amps have always had a reputation for outstanding sound quality, and I have a review of the 465 on my channel. Back on the main show floor, I wanted to try out AME's new prototype of their GNOME earphones. I gather these might actually be less expensive than some of their main flagships, which was a surprise because my favorite Mark Ribot track, Aurora, was fantastic. The percussion is spot on and sounded absolutely real. Likewise, the soundstage is magnificent, absolutely accurate in both depth and width, and you hear the weird shifts of instrument positions mid-track, suggesting huge amounts of detail from these IEMs. These IEMs might well be my new reference for acoustic music in the future. I've long hoped that one day an IEM manufacturer would do a pure dynamic driver pair of IEMs that was magnificent, and that day may have come when I tried out Faith Audio Labs E1000 and U1000 IEMs. The E1000s, with clear silicon tips that they provided, Yoko Mabuchi's live album has slightly sharp but otherwise good space and plenty of decay, suggesting quite a bit of detail. Kunihiko Sugano's Summertime is very even, dynamic and coherent, and the IEM itself seems to mostly disappear. Se Va from Santi Tuğçe is fantastic, although with the silicon tips a touch too sharp for preference, with a little bit of sibilance. Unfortunately, switching to the Spiral Dot Pros did not help. The bass, however, is incredible, and the vocals have a huge space with what seems like excess clarity. However, the U1000, which is sadly a limited edition, using the Pentacon tips in this case, there was even more space than the E1000 with delicacy and nuance, but still that dynamic driver sharpness. Mark Ribot is possibly only a touch more macro than micro compared to the AME IM I'd heard just before, as the percussion is only a tiny bit behind. This is the closest I've ever heard a dynamic driver IM come close to a top of the line tribrid or quadbrid model. At the very last minute, I got to try out 7th Acoustics Kairos. From that IM, Mark Ribot is gently yet firmly delivered, balancing dynamics and nuance. Percussion is between the AME and the U1000 that I'd tried just before, but note intensity is delivered exceedingly well. Bass is north of neutral, enough to be filling without bloat, though it may be too much on bass-strong tracks. The remastered version of Slow Moves from Jose Gonzalez reveals a bit too much lower mid-range intensity, and the guitar is slightly overwhelmed by the vocals. I also felt that the IM resonates very slightly. Otherwise, it's pretty excellent with some of the best transitions between quiet and strong dynamics that I've heard in a pair of IMs to date. Lastly, just as I was leaving, Ahmed from Elise Audio handed me a case with a pair of YU9 Audio QUE IMs, and told me that I really should check these out. So I will be doing a review of these shortly. Don't forget to subscribe to be notified when I have reviews of those and other in-ear monitors.